My name is Thomas Riley, and for 10 years, my grandkids ran to the door before I even knocked. This year, my son opened it alone and said, "They're not here." I'm 73, retired now, and I stood on that porch holding two wrapped gifts, feeling like the ground had shifted under my feet. Not here? Patrick, it's Christmas. Where else would they be? Angela took them to her parents this year, he said, not quite looking at me. Change of plans. Sorry, Dad. I held those gifts a moment longer, looking past him into the house. The tree was lit. There were 3 stockings on the mantel, not 2. Something about the whole thing felt wrong. The same way a step feels wrong right before you realize it isn't where you thought it was. You could have called me, I said. I drove 40 minutes. I know, Dad. I forgot. Things have been busy. He took the gifts from my hands anyway, said he'd make sure the kids got them, and that was that. I drove home with an empty passenger seat and a knot in my stomach I couldn't explain. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe Angela really had taken them to her folks. Families change plans sometimes. But 3 stockings on that mantel kept bothering me the whole drive home, and by the time I got to my own kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that my son had looked me straight in the eye and lied. That night, I started thinking back over the last several months, and once I started looking, things I'd let slide before started standing out clearly. Years ago, when Sophie and Jake were born, I opened custodial savings accounts for both of them, the kind meant to grow over time and help pay for college someday. Patrick was listed as the custodian on both accounts, since the law requires an adult to manage that kind of account until the kids turn 18. I'd been putting money into those accounts every single month for over a decade, birthday money, holiday money, a little extra whenever I could manage it. I never touched the balances myself. I trusted my son completely. A few months back, Patrick had mentioned, almost in passing, that his contracting business was going through a rough stretch. I offered to help directly, more than once, and each time he brushed it off, said he had it handled, said things would turn around soon. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? The morning after that Christmas doorstep, still bothered by the lie, I called the bank that held those custodial accounts, just to check the balances, something I hadn't done in almost a year. The woman on the phone put me on hold for a long moment, then came back sounding careful. "Mr. Riley, I can tell you the current balances, but I want to let you know there's been some unusual activity on both accounts over the past several months." My stomach dropped. "What kind of activity?" "Several large withdrawals, sir. Both accounts combined are down almost $31,000 from where they were a year ago." I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. $31,000, out of accounts meant for 2 children's college education, money I'd spent over a decade putting aside for them. I called my old friend George, who spent his whole career working at a credit union before he retired, and told him everything. He didn't sugarcoat it. "Thomas, custodial accounts are supposed to be used only for the child's benefit. If Patrick's been pulling money out for something else, that's a serious problem, not just a family disagreement. Let me help you look into this properly." George helped me request the full transaction history on both accounts. What came back made my hands shake. Over 8 months, Patrick had made 11 separate withdrawals, all labeled vaguely as educational expenses, moved into an account that turned out to be his business's operating account, the same struggling contracting business he'd told me was handled. I thought about that Christmas doorstep again, the lie about Angela's parents, the 3 stockings on the mantel that never made sense for a family that had supposedly left town. I wondered if the real reason I hadn't seen my grandkids that day had nothing to do with Angela's family at all. George connected me with a lawyer he trusted, a woman named Denise Fallon, who handled cases involving custodial accounts and breach of fiduciary duty. She reviewed everything within a day. "Thomas, this is about as clear a case as I've seen. Patrick had a legal duty to manage these accounts strictly for Sophie and Jake's benefit. Using the money for his business, especially without your knowledge, is a serious breach, and depending on how the withdrawals were labeled, it could rise to outright theft." Denise wanted to move carefully. She needed documentation, not just suspicion, before we confronted Patrick directly, since custodial disputes can get complicated if the custodian tries to claim the money was somehow still meant for the children. For the next 2 weeks, I said nothing to Patrick about any of it, which was one of the hardest things I've ever done, especially the day he called to casually mention he was figuring some things out with the business and might need a little help after all. I almost told him everything right then. I didn't. Denise's investigator obtained copies of the actual withdrawal requests Patrick had submitted to the bank. Several of them included handwritten notes claiming the funds were for Sophie's tutoring and Jake's private school deposit, neither of which turned out to be true. Sophie had never been enrolled in any tutoring program. Jake was still attending the same public school he always had. Denise also reached out quietly to Angela, who it turned out had no idea any of this had been happening. When she learned the truth, she agreed to speak with Denise directly, and she confirmed something that changed everything I thought I understood about that Christmas doorstep. The trip to her parents had been entirely her own plan, made weeks earlier, and Patrick had known about it the whole time. He hadn't lied about where the kids actually were. He'd simply used their absence as convenient cover, because just days before that Christmas dinner, I'd mentioned wanting to check in on the kids' accounts, and he needed me nowhere near that conversation. With Angela's statement, the false withdrawal notes, and George's documentation of the transaction history, Denise filed a formal petition with the court to have Patrick removed as custodian of both accounts, along with a claim for restitution of the missing funds. The hearing happened about 2 months later, in a small courtroom that smelled like coffee and old paper. Patrick sat across from us, his lawyer beside him, looking like a man who still believed this could somehow be smoothed over. Denise laid out the withdrawal records one by one, then read aloud from the handwritten notes Patrick had submitted, word for word, in his own writing. Sophie's tutoring, $300, Denise read. Mr. Riley, was Sophie ever enrolled in a tutoring program during this period? No, Patrick said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper in that small room. She wasn't. The judge didn't take long after that. Patrick was removed as custodian immediately, replaced by a neutral court-appointed custodian until Sophie and Jake turned 18. The court ordered him to repay the full $31,000 through a structured payment plan and referred the matter to the district attorney's office to determine whether criminal charges were appropriate given the falsified withdrawal documentation. Patrick was eventually charged with theft from a minor's account. He avoided jail time through a plea deal, given his cooperation once confronted with the full evidence, but received several years of probation and was ordered to complete every restitution payment as a condition of staying out of prison. The business folded anyway, not long after, despite everything he'd taken to try to save it. That part, I think, hurt him almost as much as the courtroom did. It's been almost a year now. Patrick and I are slowly finding our way back to something resembling a relationship, though it looks different than it used to. It's careful. It's honest, in a way we never really practiced before all this happened. Angela brings Sophie and Jake by most weekends now. Last month, Sophie asked me, completely out of nowhere, if I'd help her pick out a college someday, since she'd heard there was money saved up just for that. I told her there absolutely was, every penny of it protected now, and that I intended to keep it that way for as long as I had breath left to make sure of it. This Christmas, I pulled into Patrick's driveway the same way I had the year before, gifts in hand, my chest a little tight with the memory of what had happened the last time I stood on that porch. But before I even reached the door, it flew open, and both kids came running out into the cold in their socks, shouting my name loud enough for the whole street to hear. For the first time in over a year, it finally felt like nothing had ever been missing at all. If this story got to you, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.